gazed intently into the clearing of the dense woods. The night was cold, the coldest in a long time, causing every extremity on his body to numb. The wind whipped through the trees, and the man wrapped his coat tighter. The full moon in the cloudless night sky cast an eerie glow on the clearing, illuminating the unnatural object that lay in the center. He walked closer, careful not to make too much noise, for these woods were full of dangerous beasts. Soon he was near enough to the strange shape to distinguish what was lying there, and his breath caught. His heart started to race, and his eyes widened as he stared down at the mangled body, nearly frozen from the cold. He checked for a pulse, felt none. The body, a man he presumed, was wearing almost nothing, just a flannel shirt and a pair of tattered jeans with no shoes. The dead man's shirt lay open, revealing strange markings encompassing his torso. As he looked closer, the markings glinted as if wet. He realized with a start that these symbols were not drawn, but carved into the man's chest, and the blood was still wet, meaning that the body had not been dead for very long. He gazed up past the symbols to the dead man's face, and what he saw there took his breath away. The man's face was horribly distorted with giant claw marks on his face where some thing had ripped his face open. He quickly looked away as soon as he became nauseous when something caught his eye. It was a flickering light only about 50 yards away. This must be the man's camp, he thought. He slowly rose, careful to make as little noise as possible. He took one more look at the dead man and headed toward the fire. Another strong gust of wind blew through the trees, this one much colder than the last, unusually cold, and he felt a chill crawl up his spine. He quickly moved toward the flickering light, hoping it was a fire. As he approached the light, he saw that it was a fire and a small camp. I must get back to my camp, to my rifle, the man thought. He had been out most of the night hunting, something many of his peers would not do in this part of the woods, and he was now beginning to realize why. Suddenly, another gust of wind, much stronger than the previous, blew through the camp with such ferocity that the tent nearly blew away. The pot over the fire began banging loudly, and in one instant the fire was blown out. Just as quickly as it began, the gust of wind stopped, leaving the surrounding woods in a deafening silence. The man looked around wildly, looking for something he could use to guide himself away from this awful place. But with the gust of wind came the clouds, and now the full moon was covered. His breathing quickened, and he began groping blindly around the campsite, stumbling into the fire pit, which, bizarrely, was extremely cold to the touch. His movements slowed as the panic slowly faded, and he felt a new horror, the feeling of being watched. The man froze, gazed around the pitch-black campsite, looking for anything. As he unknowingly glanced toward the clearing he had just come from, the full moon finally came back out from the clouds, and what the man saw nearly killed him on the spot. In the clearing, the dead man, was now standing and looking at him. He could not see the man's face, but could see the tattered shirt flapping around the figure. He didn't dare move, hoping that the mangled man would not see him. Abruptly, the figure began to move toward the campsite, screaming something indiscernible. The man quickly jumped up from the fire pit and began running with all the speed away from the mangled body. He did not know which way he was running, did not look back to see if the body was still following him. He ran until he could run no longer and tripped over a fallen limb. For a full minute, the man hardly breathed, waiting for the sound he knew was behind him, the indiscernible scream and the quick, heavy footsteps. But he heard nothing, and he gradually raised his head and glanced behind him, saw nothing. Then he slowly lifted himself from the ground and felt a stab of pain in his right ankle. He checked his watch, saw that it was just past midnight, and gingerly began walking in the direction he believed was the way to his camp. He had walked for nearly half an hour, and the panic of his recent encounter was slowly fading, replaced by the instinct of survival. If he did not find his camp soon, he would freeze to death in these woods. Soon the steady rhythm of crunching leaves was replaced by the thump of his feet on packed dirt. A path, he realized. The man did not walk long before he began to feel like he was being watched again. He raised his head from his chest, just now realizing that he was at a crossroads. He looked straight ahead, and his heart jumped into his throat as he saw the mangled man who was chasing him. He quickly turned to the other paths, finding the path blocked by the same dead, destroyed man. I'm trapped, the man now realized. He looked around again at one of the dead men in front of him and saw that each was walking toward him. The moon allowed a glimpse at the mangled man, but this time something was terribly wrong. The face, the man thought. Something is wrong with the man's face, something familiar. He suddenly realized that he was no longer looking at the clawed face of the dead man, but looking into his own face, his own eyes. An inhuman terror now gripped the man, and he could no longer feel any part of his body. He looked down in a panic and realized now that he was the mangled man. His chest now showed supernatural carvings, and blood dripped down from his shirt. The man suddenly remembered the face and reached his hand slowly up. Just before his hand touched his face, there was a huge flash of light and loud bang, and the man lay dead in the clearing.